She was finally discovered on June 30th under blankets in a shower at the housing unit. The discovery was made when a woman reported to police on June 30th that she had received a Facebook message from a friend of hers. Ms. Howes said that the message disclosed that her friend's daughter had died in her sleep 3 days before she was in a pushchair in the bathroom.
Isabella Rose Wheeldon was born in September of 2021 to her mother, Chelsea Gleason Mitchell, and her father, Thomas Wheeldon. She was a smiley, blonde-haired little girl who was described as an engaging and happy child who loved going to the park, as well as anything Minnie Mouse. Prior to Isabella's birth in 2019, her mother, Chelsea, had dated a man named Scott Jeff, whom she met when they worked together at the chain pub known as Weatherspoons. This relationship had ended after only a few months. During the time they were together, however, Scott had introduced Chelsea to cannabis, cocaine, and ecstasy. Months later, in December of 2019, Chelsea would meet Thomas Wheeldon and quickly fell pregnant with Isabella. Over the course of their relationship, their daughter was said to be happy, healthy, and content. And there was absolutely no suggestion of anything but good parenting. The couple would raise Isabella for a few years together before they split up in April of 2023. It was a rather messy breakup, and soon they began to argue over Isabella's custody. Then, only weeks after the split, Chelsea would begin dating her ex, Scott Jeff, again. As soon as Scott met Isabella, he falsely believed that he was the little girl's father, since he and Chelsea had slept together around the time that she was conceived. He thought that the little girl looked just like him. Now, it's not exactly clear what Chelsea saw in Scott, but according to her, the attention that he paid her made her feel wanted and loved. She would also later say that he and Isabella connected right away. Now, Chelsea's mother, Isabella's grandmother, had thought that Scott was a bad influence in the past, mostly due to the drugs that Scott had introduced her daughter to. It was also likely due to the fact that Scott had a track record of abusive relationships and also had the words "pure hell" tattooed across his knuckles. Because of these unsavory aspects of her new boyfriend, Chelsea decided to keep her relationship with him a secret from her mother. Just days into them dating on May 24th, Chelsea would quit her job at a nursery school in Bedfordshire and then took off to Great Yarmouth with Scott and Isabella. Here, the couple and Isabella would stay at the Nelson Hotel before deciding that they should try and move to the area full-time, partly because Isabella liked being by the seaside, according to Scott. But in order to accomplish this with no job, Chelsea decided to contact the Great Yarmouth Borough Council to try to get housing by lying, saying that she was escaping an abusive relationship with her ex. She would also falsely claim that Scott was Isabella's biological father to try to get housing. However, the council would tell Chelsea that she was the responsibility of Bedfordshire authorities. So instead, the couple would end up renting a caravan for the next 4 nights in nearby Caister-on-Sea, where they would also be seen on CCTV footage walking around without Isabella. Chelsea would later admit that she was a little concerned about leaving the 2-year-old all by herself, but Scott had reassured her that it was fine. During the time they were staying in this caravan was when Scott began to care for Isabella more, feeding her and changing her diaper. When the couple no longer had money to rent the caravan on June 9th, they went to the St. George Hotel, which was a hotel that was being used for homeless families. There, the pair would be seen smoking cannabis outside on multiple occasions, leaving Isabella in the room. It was also around then that Scott, who was potty training Isabella, began getting very angry with her for having potty accidents. When she would wet herself, he would start to slap her on the hand. And when she cried and asked for Mummy, he insisted that she go to him for comfort instead. The little girl would also be subjected to cold showers as punishments. Her mother also started to make her wear hooded jackets and sunglasses to hide the bruises that began to appear on her face. Sometimes, Scott would even push the little girl for things other than potty training accidents, like when he was just frustrated because he couldn't get drugs. Another resident at the hotel would sometimes hear gurgling screams coming from the room where Isabella, Chelsea, and Scott were staying. And they would hear Isabella crying on a regular basis. One woman staying at the hotel had heard Isabella crying and knocked on the door around 2 a.m. When the door opened, she saw Scott hitting the walls with a towel. And when the woman asked him if he was all right, he replied, "No, there are things that go bump in the night." The couple only stayed at this hotel for 3 nights before they again left and went to live in a tent on the beach. When they did, a few concerned locals ended up calling police and asking them to do a welfare check on Chelsea and Isabella. During this check, an officer told Chelsea that there was a place for her and her daughter to stay, but she refused because she wanted Scott to be able to stay with them. Shortly after, the couple would pick up and move yet again, this time to a holiday park in Belton, Norfolk. While there, Chelsea would give Scott a Father's Day card that said, "Best Dad Ever," along with 3 cans of Stella Artois Lager as a present. Then on June 19th, they caught a train to Ipswich after being told that they had gotten a place at a council-run temporary accommodation unit. Days later, on June 26th, Chelsea and Scott were caught on CCTV heading back to their unit, and Isabella was seen swinging her legs in her carriage. This was believed to be the last video of the toddler alive. Later that evening, Scott was found to have searched the internet asking, "What happens when my child is breathing but not responding?" On June 30th, Chelsea would reach out to a friend on Facebook and tell this friend that her daughter Isabella had actually died in her sleep 3 nights earlier. She then told her that she and Scott had left her body in a public restroom stall. The friend immediately told Chelsea to go to police, but Chelsea refused, saying that Isabella was covered in bruises and had black eyes, so she was afraid of getting in trouble. Instead, she said that Scott was planning on burying Isabella's body, and they were just going to hope for the best that nobody would find her. This woman immediately contacted police, and when authorities went out to the temporary housing unit where Isabella had been staying with her mother and Scott, on Sidegate Lane in Ipswich, they would find the toddler's body. She was wrapped up in blankets inside her stroller that had been shoved into a shower stall. The girl had severe bruising all over her and was cold to the touch. In the early hours of the following morning, Chelsea and her boyfriend were arrested. Prior to that, the couple had actually caught a train to Bury St. Edmunds, where they had spent 6 hours laughing and drinking at a J.D. Wetherspoon's pub. While they were there, Scott had put an image of him and Isabella with "R.I.P. baby" and a heart emoji as his phone's screensaver. He was also said to have had a text exchange with his mother, Sandy Duncan, who urged him to go to police. But Scott had replied to her saying, "I can't, Mum. It's hard enough to lose a baby girl without them blaming us for it." At the time of his arrest, Scott would tell officers, "I never murdered her. I was going to hand myself in tomorrow. Do we just go straight to jail because she's dead?" According to Isabella's mother, Chelsea, she had never called emergency services as her daughter was dying because Scott had told her not to. Chelsea stated that she felt as if she was being controlled by him and had to listen. Scott told her that if authorities found out Isabella was dead, they would automatically put all the blame on her because she was her mother. A post-mortem found that the 2-year-old had extensive external traumatic injuries to the soft tissues of her body, including her head, neck, torso, and limbs. She had also suffered fractures to both of her wrists and had a complex pelvic fracture involving several bones. Her cause of death was given as an embolism due to bone marrow from her fractures entering her lungs. Her injuries likely involved kicking or stamping. 2-year-old Isabella was additionally found to have cocaine and marijuana in her system and was believed to have ingested it secondhand. During police's investigation, they would discover a video that had been taken of her on June 22nd, and it showed her lying motionless in her bed with 2 black eyes. But she hadn't died that day. It wasn't until 4 days later, on June 26th. Chelsea claimed that on that evening she had cooked dinner, and not long after, when Isabella wouldn't settle down for bed, Scott had hit her with one of his shoes. Chelsea had then noticed that Isabella was having a hard time breathing. According to the mother, Isabella was trying to use her mouth to tell her that something was wrong, but her words just wouldn't come out. Both Chelsea and Scott claimed that they had then performed CPR on Isabella, yet neither one of them would call for help. Instead, they simply carried on as if nothing had happened. They had wheeled the little girl's lifeless body around in a carriage for the next 3 days, going to a service station to buy some lemonade, as well as going to a pub. CCTV footage would show Scott putting Isabella's lifeless body in her carriage, with Chelsea next to him, smiling. They even took her dead body to the Ipswich town center on a bus, then bought Xbox equipment and controllers. A plastic bag containing these purchases was placed on top of Isabella. Then on June 30th, they headed out once again, but this time leaving Isabella's lifeless body behind in the shower stall. Both Chelsea Gleason Mitchell and Scott Jeff would go to trial in October of 2024, and they were both still adamant that they had nothing to do with Isabella's death. Chelsea did, however, admit to her charge of allowing a child's death. A pathologist would give expert evidence during the trial and say that during his entire 40-year career, he had never encountered pelvic injuries of that degree. He estimated that fractures to Isabella's pelvis had happened between 6 and 24 hours prior to her death, and her wrists that were already fractured had been refractured during that time. In his opinion, the original fractures to her wrist had occurred 8 to 14 days prior to her dying. The court was also shown videos of the youngster in the days before her death, including one in which Scott woke Isabella up by shouting "boo" in her face, and another which he used his fingers to make a gun and pointed it at her, making her cry. Just the day after that video was taken, Chelsea had actually texted her sister and told her that Scott was taking good care of her and Isabella. When Chelsea was questioned in court, she was asked if she had made it seem like everything was fine because she would have put up with anything in order to get her own home with Scott. Chelsea replied, yes. The court was then shown a video in which Scott asked the toddler if her biological father had beat her. And in it, Isabella replied to him, yes. According to Chelsea, Scott had forced these answers out of the little girl by punishing her with cold showers. The intention of this video was to show it to authorities if they were ever questioned about the toddler's injuries. In another video clip from Scott's phone, it showed him interacting with Isabella as they sat next to Chelsea in the council housing's office. He could be heard telling the toddler, "I am going to stab you. Do you want Daddy to give you a knife?" Chelsea would give evidence during the trial, and she described how she had seen her daughter bleeding from her pelvic region as she lay on a towel in the homeless shelter. She would admit that Scott had been the one to cause these injuries using his feet and fists. But according to the mother, she did not think that Scott would be like this all the time. She thought it was just a phase he was going through because he couldn't get his drugs. Isabella's mother would also admit in court that she had a bad side and sometimes heard voices. She added, "A different voice comes into my head and tells me, 'Don't get help, don't do this.' It tells me things I shouldn't do." One friend of Chelsea's would claim that Chelsea never really seemed to be all there. She had struggled with spelling and had intellectual challenges, though had never been diagnosed with anything officially. Then there was the fact that Chelsea had actually gotten a job at a nursery school in February of 2022. But she had been suspended just 5 months later after it was alleged that she had pushed a child. The incident had been referred to a local authority and an internal investigation was done. But no evidence was found to support the claim, and therefore Chelsea had been allowed to return to work. When the trial came to an end, Scott was found guilty of murdering Isabella, while the girl's mother, Chelsea, was found not guilty. Along with murder, Scott was also convicted of 2 counts of cruelty to a child. After the jury returned its verdict, the judge said to Scott, "I am obliged by law to impose a life sentence on you. I will have to fix a minimum term for you to serve." He is set to find out this minimum term on December 13th, 2024. Chelsea, who had pleaded guilty to her charge of allowing a child's death, will also be finding out her sentence then. Speaking after the murder verdict was delivered, Jade Gleason Mitchell, Chelsea Gleason Mitchell's sister, said, "It's the right decision for Isabella. We feel relieved that justice has been served because she was everything to us. Isabella was beautiful, perfect in every way that you could imagine. We'd give anything to have them both back because they were the perfect little team." Well, thank you for listening to Isabella's story today. How can anyone, let alone a mother, risk her child's well-being and life for the sake of a relationship? Especially for a relationship that's brand new and already toxic. It's insane and really makes me wonder how Chelsea could have been such a good mother in the eyes of others prior to her letting this evil man assault and kill her little girl. What do you think about this case?
Welcome the court result and sentence and take comfort that the person who killed Alfie has been held responsible.
If I were to describe him, I would say a very arrogant, selfish, controlling and manipulative man. I think he has taken people on a journey, that family on a journey which is despicable.
Alfie Lamb was born on May 13, 2014, to his mother, Adrienne Hoare, and his father, Richard Lamb, in Gillingham, Kent, England. Alfie was a happy, smiley, and active little boy, and he had been nicknamed by his mother as her Little Tarzan and Little Noodle. He loved playing with minions, cars, and his favorite TV show was Mr. Tumble. Alfie also loved going to the park and playing, and he especially loved when his grandmother would bring her dog along to the park with them. Alfie's mother, Adrienne, had left home at a very young age because both of her parents were addicts and her father was known to get violent. Adrienne had only been 15 years old when she had left home and went to live in a hostel. However, she returned to live with her mother again a couple years later when she was 17. So while 20-year-old Adrienne was still living with her mother, in 2013, she conceived Alfie after a one-night stand. At first, Adrienne didn't know who Alfie's dad was, but when she thought she figured it out and approached the man, he wasn't interested in having a child. Even though at first they had made plans for this man to see Alfie, he would only ever end up seeing him twice in Alfie's entire life. So around the time that Adrienne was actually 6 weeks pregnant with Alfie, she met a man named Richard Lamb, who was 15 years her senior. They soon began dating and then moved into a flat together. So Richard was there when Alfie was born, and he would end up bringing up the little boy as his own, even giving him his last name. Unfortunately, however, Adrienne would say that Richard was much like her parents and had drug and alcohol problems and would often get violent towards her. So the couple would go their separate ways in 2015, and Alfie's father, Richard, would end up moving out of the home that they shared, but he would come back later and set it on fire, which he ended up serving a 3-year prison sentence for. Luckily, Adrienne and Alfie were not in the home at the time that he did this. After this incident, Adrienne moved to Blackpool for a new start where she would live with her mother, Janice, again. But it wasn't long until Janice started noticing that Adrienne was becoming neglectful of her son. She would often be sitting around in her pajamas until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and Alfie would be doing the same. The grandmother also said that Alfie was frequently put into a bouncer and placed in front of the TV. Janice also claimed that her daughter was constantly on Facebook, and if Alfie would cry because he wanted something, she would pick him up, put him down beside her on the couch, give him a toy, and continue on her social media. It seemed like Adrienne had started losing interest in her son when he had become a toddler. When he was a baby, she was very protective of him and would never leave his side. But as he started to get older and more active, she began to not pay as much attention to him and also would feed him junk food all the time. Then in 2016, Adrienne met a new boyfriend who was named Stephen Watterson. Stephen, who was the adopted son of former Tory minister Nigel Watterson, was also a nightclub worker and was known to be arrogant, selfish, and jealous. Regardless of these charming characteristics, by the beginning of 2018, Alfie and his mother were living in a flat with Stephen in Croydon. On February 1st, 2018, Alfie, his mother, and Stephen went shopping for cushions in South London. They were also accompanied by 19-year-old Emily Williams and 22-year-old Marcus Lamb, as well as another younger child. The group would take Stephen's Audi for the shopping trip, but Stephen would force Marcus to drive even though he didn't have a valid driver's license. Now, Marcus was Alfie's cousin, and he was also the son of Stephen's biological mother's boyfriend. During their trip to London, the group was captured on CCTV footage, and you can see little Alfie running to try to keep up with his mother. Naturally, after all that running with his little legs, Alfie was tired and irritable by the time they returned to the car after shopping. Now, Alfie and the other young child that was with the group had been forced to sit on the floor in the rear of the vehicle near the passenger's feet. Stephen's two-door Audi Sport Coupe only had 4 seats, and there was 6 people, so this was his solution. The children even had car seats, but he had taken them out and put them into the trunk instead. I would think that the adults should be the one risking their lives if you're going to be that stupid, not the children. They didn't choose that. Upon getting in the car, Stephen had moved his electric seat back to give himself more room for his legs. Alfie, who was sitting behind Stephen's seat at his mother's feet, began making it known that he was uncomfortable. The seat was squishing him, and he began crying and called out, "Mummy." Adrian told Stephen to move his seat up, which he did at the time. But Alfie was still crying, and the crying was annoying Stephen, so he yelled at him. But yelling only scared the toddler and made him jump and begin crying harder. Then Stephen said he would not be told what to do by a 3-year-old, and again pushed his seat back into Alfie. This time Alfie began crying louder and making choking noises, but his mother, Adrian, just told him to shut up. Once Alfie had stopped crying, Stephen pulled his seat back up again. Adrian said that she thought her son was just sleeping, but once they returned home, she realized that he was completely limp. At first, they thought maybe he was just playing with them because Adrian said that in the past, he had gone floppy when he didn't get his way. But Alfie was also very pale, and after numerous attempts, his mother was unable to get him to come to. So emergency services were called.
Is the patient breathing?
I seriously don't know. There's a child. I've just seen there's a child here, and he's not physically breathing. He's with his mum, but he's just not responding at all.
Right, just can you check if he's breathing, if there's breath coming in and out of his mouth?
Is there breath coming in and out of his mouth?
Or his chest rising, is he breathing at all? His mum will know.
Can you see this? No, he's not. There's nothing.
Right. What's the address of the emergency, please? Is there a door number you can see?
No, it's just blocks of flats. I just literally driving past.
Upon their arrival, medics tried to revive Alfie before then rushing him to St. Thomas's Hospital, where he was then kept alive by a machine. But his injuries proved to be too severe, and Alfie was taken off of life support 3 days later, on February 4th, and he was pronounced dead. An initial post-mortem examination of Alfie's body proved to be inconclusive, but a pathologist would later end up determining that he had died of crush asphyxia. The maximum space in the back footwell of the car where the little boy had been sitting was 11.8 inches, or 30 centimeters, and at the touch of a button, that would be reduced all the way down to 3.7 inches, or 9.5 centimeters. When the medics had shown up at the scene on February 1st, Adrian had been on the phone with Stephen, who had fled the scene. They were trying to get their stories straight. And police were called shortly after the medics arrived, after suspicions arose about how Alfie had actually died. Adrian, who was of course trying to protect not only herself, but also her boyfriend, told police that she had actually taken a taxi when it happened. But she couldn't give them the taxi company's name, or tell them exactly what had happened to Alfie. And while she had been in the hospital with her son, Adrian had actually texted Stephen saying, "They know we're lying." Stephen had also texted Adrian while she was in the hospital, and he told her he would do anything for her, and he claimed that he would take the entire blame when he spoke to police, which would prove to be the furthest thing from the truth. During Adrian's first interview with police on February 3rd, when her son was still fighting for his life in the hospital, she would tell them that she didn't know a Stephen Watterson. She was dating a man named Stephen Marchant from Maidstone. And when police had caught up with Stephen, he had given them a fake name and a fake statement. They also found out that he had sold his Audi recently, and for very cheap. Only £800 or $996. After realizing they could be facing serious trouble, Stephen and Adrian began verbally and physically threatening the other 2 adults who had been in the car at the time, Emily and Marcus. They told them if they didn't stick to the story that Stephen made up, they knew how to make them disappear. Stephen and Adrian had also assaulted both Marcus and Emily. On February 18th, Stephen had attacked Marcus in Crystal Palace Park, and he had recorded the entire thing on his phone. Stephen had his foot on Marcus's head, which was on the ground, and he demanded to know what he had told police, while calling him grass, aka the lowest of the low, which he's clearly talking about himself. Emily, who was pregnant at the time, had also been told by Stephen that if she didn't stick to the story, her unborn baby would grow up without a mother. And at one point, Adrian had slapped Emily across the face so hard that it had left a handprint on her cheek for about a half hour afterwards. So due to the threats from both Stephen and Adrian, Emily lied to police about multiple things. But eventually, Adrian's half-sister, Ashley Jeffrey, would end up getting the truth out of Adrian. Ashley had invited her over to her house. She had then turned on her voice recorder on her phone and asked Adrian what exactly had happened to Alfie on February 1st. Adrian confessed to her and also told her that she had lied to police on numerous occasions in order to protect her boyfriend Stephen. Afterwards, Ashley took this recording and gave it right to the police. So on February 28th, Adrian, Stephen, and Emily were all finally arrested. Adrian was charged with manslaughter, child cruelty, conspiring to pervert the course of justice by making false statements to the police, as well as common assault on Emily Williams. She pleaded not guilty. Stephen was charged with manslaughter, intimidation of a witness, and conspiring to pervert the course of justice. He also pleaded not guilty. And even though she had been verbally threatened as well as physically assaulted, Emily was still charged as well. She was charged with conspiring to pervert the course of justice, and she pleaded not guilty. Now, while Stephen was being questioned by police this time, he mentioned his father's name, Nigel Watterson, making it known to police that he had powerful parents and insinuating that he was untouchable. During this interrogation, Stephen also said that he would never have hurt a child, and he had only moved his seat back an inch. And when police spoke with Adrian this time, she told them that she never thought that Alfie was in any sort of trouble. When Stephen had moved his seat back, she said that Alfie still had some room, so she thought he was fine. Now, the driver of the Audi that day, Marcus, had also spoken with police, and he told them that Adrian was not very nice to her son that day. She had treated Alfie rather bad during their shopping trip prior to the car incident. If he tripped trying to keep up with the adults because he had such tiny legs, Adrian would grab his arm, yank him up, and scream at him. So Alfie and Adrian had previously been on social services watch list. But in 2016, when she had moved in with Stephen, social services believed that she was now coping better and took her off their list. But Adrian would regularly lie to social workers, which was part of the reason she got off the list. And they never looked into Stephen's background. Had they? They would have realized that Stephen had 3 prior convictions for assault and battery, going back to 2014. These involved attacking his ex-girlfriends as well as his sister's husband. And in 2012 and 2013, girls who were aged 14 and 15 accused Stephen of making threats and sending abusive messages to them. He was at the time at least 5 years older than both of these girls. And another girl had come forward to police saying that Stephen was violent to her in 2012, but she had never filed charges for one reason or another. And on top of all of that, 8 months prior to Alfie's death, Stephen had actually threatened his and his mother Adrian's lives. About a year into Stephen and Adrian's relationship, she had actually gotten pregnant again. But she discovered around the same time that Stephen was carrying on relationships with 2 other women, so she confronted him about it. But of course, being the kind of person that he was angry at her, even though he was the one doing wrong. He somehow persuaded Adrian to get in the car with Alfie. He then took off, speeding, and said to her, "I'll kill myself, you, and that baby." Luckily, somehow Adrian was able to make him stop the car, and she called the police. But then clearly went back later. Stephen had also been known to be very controlling of Adrian. He had never given her the keys to the homes that they shared. They had lived together since 2016, but had recently moved into their new flat. So he claimed that that's the reason why he had never given her keys, was because the landlord had only given him 1 key, and they had just moved in, so he just hadn't gotten a copy yet. Stephen had also taken it upon himself to sell Adrian's phone so that she had to rely on using his, which also meant he now had access to her Facebook account. And the government benefits that Adrian was receiving each month would go directly into Stephen's bank account, and she had no access to them. In addition, Adrian had almost no contact with her friends or family because Stephen didn't like her hanging out or speaking to anyone really. And Stephen was controlling of other people as well. None of the people who lived with Stephen had been allowed to have a key to the apartment. So on the day that Alfie had been injured, Stephen was the one who wanted to go shopping, and the others had to go with him because he didn't want them to be left alone in his flat when he wasn't there. Unbelievable. Stephen's half-sister, whose name's Samantha Dawson, had previously spent time with Stephen, Adrian, and Alfie. Samantha said that both Stephen and Adrian were rather rough with the toddler. She had seen them screaming at him as well as smacking him. Samantha said that Alfie was looked after in the sense that he was dressed, fed, and clean. He, however, was not well loved. Samantha had also seen Stephen do the exact same thing to Alfie that he had done on February 1st that had caused Alfie to lose his life. She had been in the car with the couple, and Alfie had again been sitting at the floorboard near his mother's feet. Stephen had pushed the seat back, and Alfie began crying and saying, "Mummy, I can't move." Adrian said to her son, "I'll give you something to cry about." At which point, Samantha yelled at her brother Stephen to move his seat back forward and told him that's not how you should treat a child. So when Samantha heard that Alfie had died in the exact same way, she started to wonder if she had been more firm, could she have saved Alfie's life? But I doubt it. This guy's just a monster. In February of 2019, Adrian and Stephen went to trial. The prosecution told the jurors that both Stephen and Adrian had played a part in Alfie's death. In addition, his mother Adrian had fundamentally failed the little boy by putting him in such an unsafe place in the car. The prosecutor then said all she needed to do was pick him up, and she didn't. Now he's dead. Adrian's defense told the jury that Alfie had always been a happy child, and there had never been any concerns of abuse or neglect. They also said that Adrian was deeply remorseful for what she had done in the car that day, or not done. And when it was her turn to give evidence, she told the court that she knew she wasn't a completely perfect mom. But social services had never questioned her fitness as a mother, only her choice in partners. She also spoke about Stephen's temper, saying that he would explode at minor things, and she never knew when he was going to go off. And text messages, as well as overheard conversations presented in court, showed that both Adrian and Stephen would often swear about the toddler, calling him a little shit and a little fatty. And unbelievably, following Alfie's death, but before the trial, Adrian had written letters to Stephen. Part of one of these letters read, "We love you, not just me, but also our little munchkin, who will be looking down on you, is proud of you, and will be protecting you. I just wish none of this had ever happened." In another part of the letter, she then said, "You are not going to lose me. I know how much you loved our little Chubba. He loved you just as much as you loved him. The bond you had was amazing." And even when Alfie had been in the hospital being treated in intensive care, Adrian had texted Stephen saying, "If the worst does happen, you still won't lose me. And I love you. No one can be blamed." Oh, really? It was just an act of God, Adrian? So clearly, she was way too concerned with being with Stephen than her own child's life. And the thing was, Stephen was busy text messaging other women, 4 of them in fact, trying to meet up with a couple of them later that evening. He, however, insisted that he was in a state of panic and was concerned for the little boy. And he also insisted that some of the relationships to the women he had been texting were not romantic. Okay, but some of them were. Stephen was still denying that he had deliberately moved his seat back into Alfie after losing his temper. He told jurors that he moved his seat back no more than an inch, and when he had been asked to move his seat forward again, he did so immediately. Stephen's defense suggested that he had not deliberately been nasty towards Alfie. And it must have been Adrian who caused the boys' injuries, not their client. They also claimed that Adrian had slapped her son on multiple occasions. In fact, they said on that day, during the car journey, she had slapped him because Alfie was pinching her. The prosecution would say to Stephen, "On your account, Mr. Watterson, it could not have been the car seat that killed Alfie, and you have been framed horribly for Alfie's death." To which he replied, "That's correct." At the conclusion of the case, Scotland Yard's Detective Chief Inspector, Simon Harding, who had handled the case, said that Alfie had died as a result of a selfish and cruel act. He then said, "It's hard to imagine what sort of pain anyone would go through when you're being crushed in that way. For a 3.5-year-old to be crushed by something so strong and no one helping, it's a shocking way to die." He continued on, "Stephen Watterson has come across as a selfish, abhorrent individual who killed a 3.5-year-old child and has never stood up and said what has happened and taken responsibility for the actions he performed on that day." After a grueling trial and days of deliberation, a jury would clear Adrienne Hoare of manslaughter. They did, however, find her guilty of child cruelty. She was also found guilty of common assault for smacking Emily on the cheek. And both Stephen and Adrienne had previously admitted to conspiring to pervert the course of justice by lying to police. Adrienne Hoare was sentenced to 2 years for cruelty, 8 months for perverting the course of justice, and 1 month for assault. And they were to run consecutively. Stephen Watterson was found guilty of intimidation of a witness, but unfortunately, the jury could not decide if he was guilty of manslaughter, so he was to be retried at a later date. And Adrienne agreed to testify against her ex-boyfriend Stephen at his retrial for manslaughter. But Stephen would end up avoiding this by pleading guilty to his charge right before his trial was about to start. So, Stephen was then sentenced to 5 years and 6 months for manslaughter, as well as 2 years for intimidation of a witness, and 18 months for perverting the course of justice, which are to run concurrently. And when Emily was sentenced, the judge took into account her vulnerability, as well as the threats that had been made against her. At the time of the trial, Emily was also heavily pregnant. She was sentenced to 5 months in jail, which was suspended for 18 months. She was also required to serve 100 hours of community service after she gave birth to her baby. After only 5 months, Adrienne would be released from jail. However, she violated the terms of her release and was taken back in May of 2020. She was, however, released again for good in July of 2021. And in January of 2022, Stephen was released from prison under probation supervision. And Alfie's family was not informed that Stephen had been released, nor was his sister, Samantha Dawson, who had testified against him. She feared for her and her children's lives, but much to her relief, in May of 2023, Stephen was also sent back to prison for violating the terms of his release, and he will be there till at least 2026 now. And Janice Templeton Hoare said that she could not forgive her daughter Adrienne for what she's done. She believes that she should spend the rest of her life in prison. And Janice also said that she spoke to Adrienne every other day while she was in prison, but her daughter had still never shown any remorse for what she did. Janice had actually never even been invited to her grandson Alfie's funeral, and the only way that she found out that he had died was after her daughter had posted selfies. Janice says she still wishes she could put Alfie's favorite tea on and see him sitting at the table. She said, "Alfie isn't gone to me because I can't say my goodbyes to him. I just wish he'd knock on that door and say, 'Nanny, I'm hungry, I want something. I miss him so much and I wish he was here with me.'" And Alfie's aunt said about the toddler, "Every time I saw Alfie, he was so happy. He always wanted to play and had such a bright imagination. He had the best smile and he was always smiling. Alfie's death has had such a profound effect on me, my life, my health, my children, and my relationship." Well, thank you for listening to Alfie's story today. While I'm sure that Stephen did not mean to kill the little boy, he also didn't care about the great amount of pain that he was clearly in and making well known, which is just as bad. I'm glad Stephen was punished, but what a pathetic sentence for his actions. And on top of that, threatening to assault 2 other people afterwards? And were these other people really so scared of Stephen that they left the flat that they shared because Stephen wasn't going to be home, put their children into an unsafe situation in the car, and then helped him cover up Alfie's murder? If so, why were they even still hanging out with this guy? So if you do like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and turn on those notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is 2 to 3 times every week. And don't forget to click that link in the description box below so that you can get your mom or grandma or even yourself a beautiful piece of jewelry from Ana Luisa. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye.
J. Presley called 911. 3-year-old Blake Litton was in trouble. According to those who testified in court today, Presley said the boy had been hit by a car on a road near Missouri 135. But Deputy Michael Chin said he couldn't find an ounce of evidence to support that claim, so they started asking questions.
Blake Evan Litton was born on February 27, 2008, in Sedalia, Missouri, to his father, Robin Martin Litton, and his mother, Jamie Ann Miller. Blake also had 3 sisters. He enjoyed playing t-ball and the harmonica. He also loved horses and going to Sunday school. So Blake's mother, Jamie, had custody of Blake and his only slightly younger sister, Faith. Jamie actually had 2 other children, 2 older children from her first marriage. However, she had lost custody of them years back, and they had gone to live with her parents. Jamie had then given birth to Blake and Faith while she was in her second marriage, and once that marriage came to an end, she was somehow able to retain custody of both of them. Once Jamie had custody of Blake and his sister, things seemed to be going well for the family of 3. That's until April of 2011, when Jamie began dating a man named Thomas Presley. He is also known as TJ. Jamie, her children, and her new boyfriend Thomas had been living in Jamie's parents' basement. And while her parents never saw any signs of abuse from Thomas towards the children, they were highly suspicious. This is because of how Blake and his sister acted around Thomas. They never wanted to be near him. And they would try to stay upstairs with their grandparents for as long as possible. They never wanted to go back down into the basement. The grandparents, however, had never seen any injuries to either child. At the beginning of January 2012, the family decided to move out of Jamie's parents' basement, and they moved into Thomas's mother's house in Ivy Bend. The day that Jamie had left her parents' house, her father, Jim Miller, had expressed concerns about her new boyfriend Thomas. But she didn't listen, and she took her children, carrying them out of their grandparents' house, crying. This would be the last time that Jim saw his grandson Blake. On the morning of February 16, 2012, Thomas would call emergency services, saying that his girlfriend's son, Blake, had been struck by a hit-and-run driver on a local roadway, Missouri 135, which is about 100 miles southeast of Kansas City. When the police arrived on the scene shortly after 5 a.m., Thomas told them that he was going to see his brother in Sedalia. While on their way, Blake decided that he had to use the bathroom, Thomas claimed. So the little boy had gotten out of the car, and that's when he had been struck by the other vehicle. However, the investigators were immediately suspicious of Thomas's story when they were unable to find any loose vehicle parts, tire tracks, blood, or urine along the side of the road to substantiate that an accident had even happened. Thomas's story and the answers that he was giving to the questions police were asking him were also not adding up. Blake was rushed to the nearby Bothwell Hospital in Sedalia, where he was then pronounced dead. Upon his arrival at the hospital, doctors immediately reported that his injuries were not consistent with a hit-and-run accident. An autopsy was performed on the little boy to see what really happened that had caused his death. The coroner found that Blake had died as a result of multiple injuries that had not been caused by a car, but rather a beating. He had bruises on his head, neck, torso, buttocks, arms, and legs. Blake also had a lacerated liver and a ruptured blood vessel in his brain. So once the medical examiner had determined that Blake's cause of death was homicide, both Thomas and Jamie Ann were placed under arrest. 25-year-old Jamie was then charged with second-degree murder as well as 2 counts of first-degree child endangerment. 21-year-old Thomas Presley was charged with second-degree murder and child endangerment. They were each held on a $100,000 bond. Jamie's second-degree murder charge stemmed, in part, from her not seeking immediate medical care for Blake. And she did not call 911 when she found out he was seriously injured. Jamie was also charged with child endangerment after she had let her boyfriend Thomas drive away with both Blake and her daughter Faith. Not long after Thomas and Jamie were arrested, police would find out what really happened to Blake on that day. In the morning on February 16th, Jamie had to go into work for an early shift. But on her way in, she would receive a text message from her boyfriend Thomas saying that he had lost it and he had beaten Blake to the point where he thought he was paralyzed. Thomas told her that her son was in bad shape. So as one should do, Jamie told her boyfriend to bring her son to the emergency room. However, Thomas told her that he couldn't do that because he was not willing to go to jail for the rest of his life. Once she had arrived at her job at Golden Age Living Center nursing home, she asked one of her coworkers if she could borrow some money to take her son to the hospital. She also asked her boss if she could leave work because her son was sick, but did not disclose the extent of his injuries, so she was told no. Surveillance video from the nursing home shows a dark-colored SUV pull into the parking lot around 5 a.m., and then Thomas gets out and is seen walking around the vehicle. Jamie went out to the parking lot to meet with Thomas, and when she did, she said that Blake looked very peaceful sitting in his car seat. The mother said she then screamed Blake's name, but he didn't respond, and his breathing was weak. Jamie claimed that when she had initially taken his pulse on his left arm, she obtained a radio pulse reading of 62, but she later admitted that the pulse she felt might have just been her own, as she was in a rush to check Blake's pulse. While still in the parking lot, Thomas had told Jamie that he was going to fake a car accident, so that way he could get medical attention for Blake without having to bring him to the hospital himself and possibly getting in trouble for beating him. Regardless of this statement that Thomas made, Jamie later told investigators that she believed that when he pulled out of the parking lot just a few minutes later, he was going to be bringing her son Blake to the emergency room. Sure you did, considering he just said he wasn't going to. After seeing what he had done to her son, I don't know why she would have ever let him still drive away with her daughter as well. Jamie then returned back to her job, and she received a text message a few minutes later at 5:15 a.m. from her boyfriend saying that Blake had been hit by a car. At that point, she clocked out of work. Her shift was set to end at 6 o'clock in the morning anyways. From there, Jamie had walked to a coworker's house so that she could use her phone charger. And then she had later driven to the scene of the fake accident. Now, when Jamie spoke with police on the scene, she did not tell them what had really happened to her son, that her boyfriend had actually beaten him. Blake's sister Faith was taken into custody, and she was given a medical examination that very day. And the doctor would find that she also showed signs of abuse. Faith had a broken wrist, as well as extensive bruising to various parts of her body. The medical team also found a patch of hair stubble or regrowth, visible from a healing hematoma, which is a mass of clotted blood that forms in tissue or an organ as a result of a broken blood vessel. The child's liver enzymes were also elevated, indicating a blunt injury to the liver. The little girl blamed all her injuries, which were estimated to be at least a week old, on her daddy, meaning Thomas. She also told investigators that on the day her brother had died, Thomas had actually punched him in the mouth because he had pooped his pants. After hitting him, Thomas had then put the boy into the bathtub and began punching him even more, which only caused him to defecate even more. Blake's younger sister Faith ended up being placed with her loving paternal grandparents after she received medical treatment.
You tell me, DeMaio, why is this boy's brain and liver injured?
The child was punched or kicked in the belly, rupturing the liver. The head was slammed against something hard, most likely the bathtub, maybe once, but more likely repeatedly. And this produced hemorrhaging in the brain, hemorrhaging the abdomen from the liver, lacerations, tears. The child was beaten to a pulp. And you're right, this should be a death penalty case.
And why, doctor, why did the little 3-year-old baby boy start defecating in the tub? Why?
Because his brain was being destroyed. He was losing all ability to control all his functions. And
look at this boy. Look at him. Why is this not a death penalty case?
Now, when police spoke with Thomas, he would finally admit that he had beaten Blake when he had been watching him and his sister Faith. Sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning, Blake had misbehaved and had an accident. This had enraged Thomas, and he had struck him more times than he could remember, he said. He had hit him with an open hand, and then he had also kicked him several times. "I really beat him bad this time," Thomas said to investigators. "Yeah, no shit, he's dead. Couldn't get any worse. He claimed that he had blacked out and lost control while he was beating Blake. However, Thomas would also say that he had placed the toddler into bed because he thought he was going to be okay. However, less than 30 minutes after he had put him into bed, Thomas heard a loud noise coming from the kitchen. There, he said he found Blake laying on the floor unresponsive. At that point, Thomas said he knew the child was badly injured as he was gasping for breath and his eyes were rolling back in his head. After realizing how badly he had injured Blake, Thomas loaded the little boy and his sister into the SUV. He had then driven with them to the nursing home where their mother, Jamie, worked. On the drive there, Thomas informed Jamie that he had badly beaten her son, and he felt he overdid it. After meeting with Jamie and leaving the nursing home, Thomas claimed that he had started driving towards Sedalia to get medical attention for Blake. But on the way there, he had realized that the little boy died, and he called EMS and came up with his fake hit-and-run story. While speaking with police, Thomas Presley also came out and said that he and the child's mother, Jamie, had recently been having problems, and he believed that Jamie was possibly cheating on him. In the months before Blake's death, several calls had actually been made to the child abuse hotline. And Blake's grandmother said she had made several of these calls after becoming concerned about her grandchildren, but nothing was done to help them. Nothing. Thomas and Jamie had originally been charged with second-degree murder as well as child endangerment. But first-degree murder charges would be filed against both of them on November 15th, 2012. While in custody, Jamie was also charged with third-degree assault on a correction officer. Then, while also in jail prior to her trial, Jamie would become pregnant. One night in September of 2015, she had intentionally clogged her toilet in her jail cell. After alerting a tower guard to the problem, a male inmate was allowed to go into the cell to fix the toilet unsupervised. The sheriff said that this is against jail policy, and the tower guard was supposed to escort the prisoner. So Jamie and this other inmate had used this opportunity to have consensual sex, and she ended up pregnant, because that's all she needs is another kid. An internal investigation was later conducted, and the tower guard who let the prisoner go into Jamie's cell on his own was fired. And according to the sheriff, Jamie is being held responsible for all her medical costs because she's the one who got herself into that situation. In January 2015, after a trial, Thomas Presley was found guilty for his role in Blake's murder. He was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of life in prison, one of them being without the possibility of parole. Blake's grandmother, Diana Litton, read a letter out loud to the courtroom. In it, it said that Blake's sister Faith was still scared of Thomas. The little girl thought that Thomas needed to stay in jail until he died. And then the 6-year-old said that she felt like if he ever was released, he would do to her what he had done to her brother. Thomas Presley then apologized to Blake's family, saying that he took full responsibility for his actions. And he did not mean for any of it to happen. Then, in September of 2016, Jamie Litton would plead guilty. Her charge of first-degree murder was reduced down to second-degree murder in exchange for her plea. She was also sentenced to life in prison. A candlelight vigil was held for Blake in Stover on February 23, 2012. Those in attendance were encouraged to wear Blake's favorite color, blue, and bring a candle to light as they walked around Morgan County R1 and ended in Stover Park. All money collected at the event went to the family to help them with the funeral costs. And 3 days before Blake Litton was supposed to turn 4 years old, grieving family, friends, and a community in mourning gathered to say goodbye to the little boy at a memorial service at Campbell Lewis Chapel in Sweet Springs. During the service, Blake's sister Faith, who was dressed in a blue dress, played quietly and hugged all her family members. After the service, she said how much she misses her brother. Blake was then buried in Fairview Cemetery in Sweet Springs, Missouri. Well, thank you for listening to Blake's story today. The lack of concern that Blake's mother showed when she found out how badly injured her son was is sickening. She made no effort to help him, and she even left her daughter Faith in Thomas's care after he had just beaten her son to death. Blake's sister Faith is so fortunate that she was saved before it was too late for her as well. So if you do like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and turn on those notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is about 2 times every week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Dominic Calhoun was born on October 17, 2005, in Grand Blanc, Michigan. He was born to his mother, Corinne Baker, and his father, Eric Calhoun. Dominic also had one brother who was named Tyler Baker. Dominic was an easygoing child who had a kind heart. He also loved dancing, going snowmobiling with his grandfather, and his blankie. Dominic and his brother Tyler had moved with their parents from home to home for most of their lives. They had even lived with both sets of grandparents at one point. And the boys had also lived with family friends as well. In 2009, when Dominic was 3, Corinne Baker was given full custody after her relationship with his father, Eric, had ended. Both Eric and Corinne's parents had also tried to gain custody of Dominic, but as you can tell, they were unsuccessful in those attempts. And Corinne already had custody of Tyler, as he had a different father than Dominic did. Corinne was also hanging around a man named Brandon Hayes. Brandon was a known drug dealer in the area. Brandon was 24 and Corinne was 25 when they met, and they remained friends for about a year before they would start seeing each other. Their relationship actually began when Eric Calhoun was sent to prison. As she puts it, Corinne was lonely and desperate, and that's when Brandon swooped in to save her, or so she thought. And Brandon, of course, as in a lot of these cases, was not a very stand-up guy. He had been in trouble with the law for most of his adult life. In 2004, when he was only 18 years old, he had been incarcerated for domestic assault and battery. Then, in 2007, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison for assaulting, resisting, obstructing, and fleeing police. And Brandon also had a few drug possession charges as well. Only 3 months into their relationship, Corinne, Brandon, and the boys moved into an apartment together. They were now living at the Pinehurst Apartments in Linden, Michigan. And the first few days was normal. They were unpacking, setting up their new place together. At first, Brandon was sweet to Corinne and the 2 boys. But only days in, Brandon would get more agitated than normal, and he was very dismissive of Corinne's feelings. There was also the fact that Brandon did not like that Dominic's dad, Eric, did not always pay his child support. Brandon made his frustration with this very well known. It seemed that Brandon also might have been jealous of the fact that Corinne would let her ex see Dominic, even when he didn't pay his child support, because Brandon's ex would hold it against him and not let him see his own daughter if he was late on a child support payment. About a week after they had moved in together, on April 8th, 2010, 4-year-old Dominic was sitting on the couch, eating a bowl of cereal and watching TV. While he was sitting there, the little boy accidentally urinated on himself, and this sent Brandon into an absolute rage. He began kicking and punching little Dominic in the head. Brandon then turned his rage towards Corinne and struck her in the face and started pulling out clumps of her hair. He was also screaming, "Who's gonna pay for this?" The next day, Brandon once again began punching and kicking little Dominic in the head, and this time in the groin as well. And when Corinne attempted to cover Dominic's body with her own, Brandon then started kicking her in the head. He was also screaming how he didn't want to raise Dominic, and he was sick of having to pay for him since his father didn't provide any money or support. And during this, Brandon also told Corinne that her son Dominic was a little crackhead who deserved to die. On the following day, Saturday, April 10th, the beatings only continued. Dominic was lying in bed, unconscious at this point, when Brandon went in and grabbed the little boy by the arm and dragged him back out to the living room, where he began beating him yet again. And on this day, the attacks would go even further. Brandon would not only push his fingers into little Dominic's eyes, he would also burn his tiny hands, slam him into walls, and he even pulled out a few teeth with his bare hands. On the fourth day, Sunday, April 11th, Corinne's sister, Christine, along with 3 of her friends, went over to Corinne and Brandon's apartment so they could buy some marijuana from them. It was then that they saw Dominic lying on his bed, completely battered and bruised. And Corinne, who also had bruises on her, told them not to disturb Dominic because he was just sleeping. Corinne's sister, however, knew something was clearly wrong, and she called Dominic's paternal grandfather, Rick Calhoun, who came rushing over to help. Rick knocked on the door and Corinne answered. He had to push past her to get into the apartment. He then went to Dominic's room, where he saw him laying on his bed, completely beaten up. At first, Rick thought maybe the little boy had just taken a bath and then fallen asleep. But he wasn't. He was dying. Rick Calhoun immediately contacted the authorities, who were, by the way, less than 3 minutes away from the couple's apartment. Brandon tried telling Rick that somebody else had beat up Dominic. At that point, Rick punched him right in the face. Rick felt like the pair had already had a plan for what they were going to do with Dominic's body after he had died, and he felt like he had probably interrupted that plan. Once police officers had arrived and entered the apartment, they found Dominic in his bedroom, lying on his back, wearing only a t-shirt and pull-ups. They also found his favorite blankie, splattered with blood. Dominic was unconscious at the time and making a moaning sound. A police officer who had arrived on the scene, Angelo Panos, said he was devastatingly shocked when he first saw the little boy, and he lost his demeanor and turned to Corinne and Brandon and yelled, "What the fuck kind of animals are you? Look at this little boy." The paramedics immediately transported him to the Hurley Medical Center. There, a portion of Dominic's skull had to be removed to help relieve pressure because his brain was so swollen. The doctors had no hope that Dominic would pull through. His injuries were so severe. Doctors said that every inch of his body was covered in bruises, including the soles of his feet. He was declared brain dead and placed on life support. Family members stood around Dominic's hospital bed on April 12, 2010, as doctors unplugged the life support machine and declared Dominic Calhoun dead. 24-year-old Brandon Hayes was arrested and held without bond on 9 different charges, including torture, murder, child abuse, assault, and various drug possession charges. He admitted what he had done to Dominic. Now, Corinne was also transported to a hospital. Corinne had suffered broken bones, bruises, and cigarette burns. She had also been in and out of consciousness. But as soon as she was released from the hospital, Corinne was arrested as well and charged with second-degree murder for what she did not do to save her son Dominic's life. She was booked into county jail. However, she was shortly after released on bond. Now, Corinne would say she had fought so hard to save her son Dominic's life, yet everyone was blaming her. She told police that Brandon had held her and Dominic hostage, and that she wanted to get the little boy medical treatment, but Brandon told her that she could not. Corinne said that every time she tried to get to Dominic, Brandon had ripped her away. But the truth was, Corinne had not done enough to save her little boy. In fact, investigators had found out that she had left the apartment twice during those 4 days of the attack. But since she was on probation and had violated it by moving out of Livingston County, as well as being on drugs, she didn't go get any help. And one of the places Corinne had actually gone was with her parents to a doctor's appointment on Friday, April 9th. Her parents later said that during that trip, Corinne seemed smiley and happy, And she even spoke to Brandon on the phone in front of them. Her mother, Julie Baker, said, "I'll say this until the day I die. All she had to do was say one word. Just one." Later that same day, Corinne, Brandon, and the boys would go to the dollar store with Brandon's father, Arnold Hayes. Now, Arnold would notice the severe burns on Dominic's hands, as well as the bruising to his head. Corinne told him that another child had actually burned Dominic's hands with a hot stick that they had taken from a fire pit that was nearby the apartment. There we go, blaming another kid again. Arnold advised them that they needed to get Dominic to the emergency room to get treated for his injuries. But Corinne said that she would not bring him because she was afraid that she would get blamed for those injuries. Brandon's father would also later say that his son was in a very raw mood because he had spent over $100 on their shopping trip that day. His son did not like having to spend lots of money. The trip home in the car was full of tension. Now, another person who had seen Dominic during these 4 days of the attack was Brandon's uncle, Rodney Keene. He had also been to the apartment that Friday, and he saw that Dominic's hand was red and very swollen. He told them to get him to the emergency room, just like Brandon's dad had, but they again told him that they weren't going to because they claimed they had warrants out for their arrest and they didn't want Child Protective Services involved. And while he was still there that day, Rodney confronted Corinne again about getting Dominic medical attention. And at the time he did this, Brandon was not in the room. But Corinne brushed him off and didn't ask him for any type of help whatsoever, even though she knew that Brandon was not within earshot. Since she was not listening to him, Rodney made the decision to call Corinne's mom. Corinne's mom then called her over and over again, trying to get her to take Dominic to the doctors. And although Dominic was vomiting and bleeding, Corinne did not.
He took all my clothes from me, caught me. I was going to jump over the balcony because I didn't know what else to do. You know, my baby's gone, and I wish it was me, and he was still here. That's what I wish. And I will fight. And I will make sure that the monster that did this is gone forever. I never will see another light of day again.
How did this start? What did he do?
It started because I went to the doctor on Friday with my mom and my dad. And Brandon called me and told me about a burn. He said that he had washed Dominic's hand and the skin peeled off his hand. And Tyler, my oldest son, I'm assuming he scared him into the story. He told him that Dominic burnt his hand and another kid burnt it with a stick. And I just had an awful feeling. So Saturday I confronted him. And
so he had burned?
He burned Dominic with scalding hot water.
Why did he do that?
I don't know. And I wasn't there to protect him. And then when I was, he was trying to kill me. And when my sister walked through the door on Sunday, it was like an angel. Literally was sent to that door. And even though I said out loud, don't call the cops, because he said if I called the cops, he would kill me. And I didn't want him to hurt her, because he had her cornered in the doorway, you know.
So it was like a psychological game?
Yes.
Just to get him to not, so that she could get away.
Yes.
And obviously she's going to do it.
Yes. And she did the right thing. She went and got Dominic's grandpa, Rick Calhoun, who came in, and thankfully, you know, he called 911, but it was too late. And when you fight so hard to keep someone alive and then be blamed for it.
Corinne's mother has also said, maybe one day she can admit that she did not do everything humanly possible to save her son. And some of Corinne and Brandon's neighbors had made statements saying that they had heard many loud noises, including cries coming from the apartment, but nobody had notified the police. One neighbor even heard Dominic yelling, "Mommy, make him stop." Still, nobody called the police. Unbelievable. Corinne Baker agreed to testify against her now ex-boyfriend, Brandon Hayes,
in exchange for a sentence of 13 to 20 years in prison.
So, in August of 2011, Corinne pled guilty to her second-degree murder charge and was given her 13 to 20 years as agreed upon. She was also given 2 to 4 years for her second-degree child abuse charge. Now, prior to the trial, Brandon's lawyer was saying that his client was plagued by hallucinations, and he was not fit to stand trial. But unfortunately for him, a psychiatric evaluation found Brandon completely competent to stand trial and be punished. So in January of 2012, Brandon's trial began. One of the people that testified during this trial was the sheriff who had been assigned to Dominic's case. He testified that Dominic's case went beyond torture, and he had also spoken with veteran police officers who had seen many things. They even said that Dominic's case was particularly gut-wrenching. He would also make the statement, "All kids talk about the boogeyman. Dominic met his boogeyman." Also testifying was the doctor who had performed surgery on Dominic in an attempt to save the boy's life when he had come into the hospital that day in April. He says that the image of Dominic on the surgery table still haunts him. He could never have been prepared for what he saw that day. He told the court that it was clear to him that Dominic's brain was not going to survive, and that he had been completely covered in bruises. And the doctor who performed the autopsy on Dominic said that these were the worst injuries he had seen on any child or adult. And on top of these statements, there was the heart-wrenching testimony from Dominic's brother Tyler. He had witnessed what had happened to Dominic during those 4 days. He told the court that his brother had been puking up everything, including blood, and he said that he thought his brother's leg had been broken. Every time he stood up, he dropped back down, Tyler said. Tyler also told the jury that he knew Brandon hated him and Dominic. In court, a detective would also read a letter written by Brandon Hayes. It was written one day after Dominic had been taken off of life support, while Brandon was in prison. It said, "Dear Judge, I am so sorry for what I did to Dominic and Corinne. My heart hurts so bad for them and the family. I would never do anything like this and never had the intention of doing what I've done. I'm sorry, Judge, I'm a drug addict." And what that has to do with it, I have no idea, because being a drug addict does not automatically make you a psychotic murderer. And throughout his trial, Brandon showed no emotion, except for when his father took the stand. At that point, he began crying. The jury had deliberated for 2 hours before coming back with the verdict of guilty on all counts. Dominic's family sobbed as the verdict was read out loud.
Justice 1, Brandon 0. That's what I gotta say. That's right.
Woo! Woo! Cheers, tears, embraces, and a sense of relief.
Brandon Hayes was to spend the rest of his life in prison. The judge sentenced him to 100 to 150 years in prison for the second-degree murder conviction and life without parole for the 2 counts of felony murder. He also received lengthy sentences for his remaining 7 counts, including 60 to 90 years in prison for torture. So needless to say, I don't think Brandon's ever getting out of jail. And that's the way I like to see it. Brandon's defense attorney would tell anyone who listened that authorities had charged the wrong person and that Corinne was the one who was responsible for her son's death. He said that Corinne had a history of lying, drugs, and run-ins with CPS. But Brandon had a history of violent crimes, so if I had to choose... His lawyer also said that even though Brandon does drugs, and people may not like him for that, that does not make him a murderer. Brandon seems to think that they go hand in hand, though. That's what he wrote in his letter to the judge, so you guys got to get on the same page. So now, after 2 years of grieving, Dominic's family finally felt like they had some closure. Rick Calhoun even hugged one of the jurors on the way out of the courthouse, saying to them, "You made my day. You made my family's day. You saw the truth." In June 2012, Governor Rick Snyder signed Dominic's Law. This strengthens the penalties for first and second degree child abuse. And it also adds penalties when the abuse is committed in front of another child. In June 2013, Corinne Baker tried to get her plea tossed out and attempted to appeal the case from behind bars. Corinne had sought to withdraw her plea, maintaining that she had been told it was the only way she would be able to testify against Brandon. But her efforts were refused by the Michigan Court of Appeals in 2014. And the Michigan Supreme Court also refused to even hear her appeal. To this day, Corinne still maintains her innocence. She even wrote a book titled, "I Didn't Kill My Baby." And from time to time, she updates an online blog where she talks about what happened. She has also said in one of these blog posts that she remembers the blue of Brandon's eyes turning black that day. She said she really believed he was possessed by a demon and that he had never shown any signs of abuse prior. In a recent interview from prison, Corinne said that she had turned her life around, including getting sober, mentoring others, and earning an associate's degree. She's hoping that others can find it in their hearts to forgive her. But regardless of what Corinne said, her family says that she's never showed any remorse for Dominic's death and hasn't even written them one letter while she's been in prison. At the beginning of this year, 2023, much to the disdain of Dominic's family, the Michigan Parole Board made the decision to release Corinne on parole. So she was supposed to have been paroled this past spring. So as far as I know, she is out there in the world again. Eric and his family tried to appeal
But that was
it.
denied.
Dominic Calhoun's funeral was held on April 16, 2010 at the Freedom Center in Fenton. Hundreds of people were in attendance. Family and friends shared memories of the little boy who was known for his bright blue eyes. The stage behind his tiny white casket was filled with flowers, teddy bears, and a big plastic dump truck. There was also a sea of blue ribbons for Child Abuse Awareness Month and hats stitched with Dominic's name in them. Well, thank you for listening to all of Dominic's story today. This mother is unbelievable, acting like she did everything she could to help Dominic when she had clearly left the house multiple times, once even without Brandon, but she didn't get any help for him. And the police station is even within walking distance of their apartment. The torture that Dominic had to go through during those 4 days is hard to even think about. And now, on top of it, his mother's out of prison. But that's not to take away from the fact that the person who actually did do this to him, Brandon, will be in jail for the rest of his life. So that is great news. So if you do like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. And turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is 2 to 3 times every week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Hello and welcome back to A Wicked World. Today's case is about a negligent mother, a monster of a boyfriend, and a poor innocent 2-year-old little girl. As I'm sure you are aware, this is another child crime case. This is the story of Ariana Smythe. Ariana was born July 15th, 2014 in Camden, New Jersey, to her mom, Amber Bobo, and her dad, Robert Smythe. They split up in April of 2016. Amber stayed at the apartment that they shared together. Robert moved out, and they continued to share custody of little Ariana. They just got along with each other and agreed to share custody, nothing formal. Now, little Ariana, who was 23 months old, almost 2 years old, was an adorable little girl. She was so cute. She had the biggest smile, and her relatives describe her as so loving and happy all the time. Her favorite movie was Frozen, and even at her young age, she knew the words to the songs and would sing along with them. She also loved dancing in the color blue, like Elsa. But poor sweet Ariana would not make it to her second birthday, thanks to her terrible mother's poor decisions. In June of 2016, Amber met a new guy who she started dating. It was 22-year-old Michael Desporto. Soon after meeting, Michael had expressed to Amber that he wanted to meet Ariana, as well as have some time alone with her to get to know her better. She's 23 months old. They've been dating for 2 weeks, keep in mind. Amber wasn't sure, so she decided to hop on Facebook and ask in one of her mommy groups what everybody else's opinion was. Hundreds of people replied, "Do not let a stranger be with your baby girl alone." Amber didn't want to hear this. She got angry and told the other women that they were being ignorant, rude assholes. Shortly after, on July 2nd, 2016, Amber and her new boyfriend went to pick up little Ariana from her father's house. They went back to Amber's apartment, and Michael decided he was going to stay the night. He then asked if he could take Ariana to a nearby park, so, as I said earlier, he could get to know her a little bit better. They were gone for 15 minutes before they came back to the apartment. They then left again to go see the fireworks. Michael asked Amber if she wanted to come along as well, but she said she was too tired to go, so he took her again by himself. They'd only known each other for 2 weeks, and she let this man take her child. When Michael arrived back home with Ariana, Amber put her to bed in her bedroom. She often slept there when it was hot out because Amber's room was the only one that had air conditioning. Amber joined Ariana later in bed around 11 p.m. that night. Then, the next morning, around 7, Amber woke up and saw that Ariana was no longer next to her in bed, which was very unusual because Ariana never got out of bed by herself. She always waited for her mommy. Amber walked out into the living room to see Ariana curled up on the couch sleeping in a blue blanket. That's where Michael had been sleeping. However, Michael was currently outside smoking a cigarette. Amber thought nothing of it and went back into the bedroom alone, leaving Ariana there to sleep. When Amber woke up again a few hours later, she went back out there and she noticed this time that Ariana was not wearing the same pajamas that she had been wearing the night before. She also noticed that she had bruises on both sides of her head and asked Michael what had happened. He played ignorant at first and then later said, "Oh, she fell at the park, so that's probably what they're from." Weird how you all of a sudden remember that and you never told Amber last night? At this time, Amber said that she wanted to bring Ariana to the hospital, and Michael talked her out of it. He said, "She's fine, just put a little ice on it and let her rest." Amber agreed. Around 11 a.m., Amber prepared a bath for Ariana. When she undressed Ariana and put her in the bath, she noticed more bruising on her back and around her private areas. She hadn't noticed these earlier as Michael had insisted on changing Ariana's diaper that morning. She again said to Michael that she wanted to take Ariana to the hospital. He talked her out of it yet again, saying that it would make them look bad if they went to the hospital now. Apparently, this was more important to Amber than the safety of her own child. Once again, nothing was done to help little Ariana. A little while later, the couple decided that they wanted to go shopping at the Deptford Mall. They put a hat on Ariana to cover up her bruises. At some point during the shopping trip, Ariana started throwing up, so they had to bring her back home. When they got home, she started vomiting even more. They then cleaned her up, put new clothes on her, and headed back to the mall again. It didn't matter to Amber. She wanted to go shopping with her new boyfriend. Who cares what Ariana's going through right now? Let's go shopping. When they came back to the apartment hours later, Amber went and laid Ariana down in her bed. When Amber went back in to check on her, she saw that Ariana was vomiting again and her eyes started rolling into the back of her head. She laid there motionless. When Amber told Michael that she wanted to get help for Ariana, he said that she was fine and she just needed to rest. She pushed the issue again, and he said, "I'm never gonna see you again if you do." Clearly trying to manipulate her, to get her to not call the police. But she did finally call 911 at 6:14 p.m. By that time, though, it was much too late. The first responders arrived and noticed that the child was still breathing, but she was unresponsive and had bruising from head to toe, a lump on her head, as well as red bruising around her private area. Ariana was transported to Cooper University Hospital. There, she was diagnosed with a subdermal hemorrhage, which is bleeding of the brain. Also, cerebral edema, which is the swelling of the brain. And she required immediate brain surgery. She also had bilateral bruising and swelling on her labia, a complete fracture of her right humerus, bilateral pulmonary contusions, which are injuries to her lungs caused by blunt force trauma to the abdomen area. And she also had urine and blood in her abdomen as well. On July 5th, Michael was charged in connection with Ariana's sexual assault and murder. Poor Ariana was still in the hospital, fighting for her life. They checked twice, and she had no brain activity. Robert, her biological father, made the very, very tough decision to pull the plug on her life support. An autopsy was conducted, and it was determined that her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. After a 2019 jury trial resulted in a hung jury, Michael was charged with first-degree murder of a child under the age of 14, second-degree sexual assault, first-degree aggravated sexual assault, first-degree felony murder, first-degree murder of a child under the age of 18, and first-degree murder while engaged in the commission of a sexual act. Due mostly to witness testimony from Amber, Michael was prosecuted, as they were unable to find any DNA evidence after they had checked little Ariana's body, clothing, and diapers multiple times. They were not able to pull any DNA for some reason. I think it's because he had plenty of time to cover his tracks, and little Ariana had been cleaned and bathed a few times that day already. When Michael was interrogated and Ariana was still in the hospital, he was shown pictures of her laying there in pain in the hospital bed, unconscious. Mere hours later, in the same interrogation room, he was caught touching himself and pinching his nipples. They said it was inadmissible evidence because it had nothing to do with the murder. I think it has something to do with it. How can he be doing that kind of thing when this poor sweet baby girl is dead? There's something wrong with this man clearly, and that's evidence of it right there. For Amber's part in Ariana's death, she was also sentenced to only 3 years behind bars. She had taken the plea deal to testify against Michael, which got her sentence reduced. She was actually up for parole right after she was sentenced, due to time served. However, it was denied and she had to serve an additional 18 months in prison, as the parole board said that she did not understand why her acts were criminal in nature and what she had done wrong. 18 months is not enough at all. She willfully gave that child to Michael. She did nothing to stop him, and then she did nothing to help Ariana once she was already in danger. She was, however, released from prison on September 3rd of 2018. Ariana's story is especially upsetting, knowing that her mother's need to go shopping and her stupid mistakes led poor Ariana to this fate. Amber Bobo was completely negligent and deserved much more time in jail for her part in Ariana's death. I'm sure that this was not the first time that Michael had preyed on a single mom. He saw an easy target in Amber Bobo, and he went for it. I hope that he has not done anything similar to any other children out there. It is just awful that poor Ariana was the one that had to suffer the consequences of Amber Bobo's actions. Well, thank you for listening to all of Ariana's story. If you like true crime, don't forget to subscribe below. And check back often because there'll be at least one new case uploaded every week here on A Wicked World. Bye.